Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast, brought to you in part by our official sponsor, StubHub. To find out any great deals going on for tickets right now, that's any ticket, by the way. Baseball season's wrapping up, or if you're looking ahead to football season like I am, and a few maybe road trips, maybe some home games, head on over to steelcityunderground.com/tickets for more information. And, of course, if you're going to purchase tickets anyways, folks, we could use a little bit of credit here, so that would very much help us with our sponsor, and I think my guest host would agree with that. My name is Joe Kuzma. If you hadn't noticed, I'm losing my voice. I have a sore throat. I don't know why. Could be some bad McDonald's I ate, but I do have my guest host back. You were just a guest the last time, Zach, but Zach Metkler, how you doing?
Not too bad, Joe. Thanks for having me back on.
Don't sound too excited. I think
long day.
Oh, it is. And you know what? We're getting ready for some preseason football. And in doing so, I have no idea how we could even preview a preseason game other than maybe just talk about the depth chart that was just released and some of the guys that will be playing. But just some preparation heading up into that, some personal life. Aside from me losing my voice, doesn't sound like it because I could talk forever, but trust me, I'm going to flame out at some point here. You're going to hear a bottle of water crinkling in the background, something crazy. But Zach and I are going to go through this list, and we've been dealing with some issues on our own that have nothing to do with this show. One of mine is just trying to get my riding mower to go. It's like, geez, am I going to be cutting grass during this preseason game? I might, because I may get so bored with it, I may just step out and say, hey, you know what? I got to cut the grass. But what better time to do it than when Bart Houston comes in at quarterback? So that's all pending. I won't be able to cut the grass if Bart Houston doesn't come into the game, or I may not be able to cut the grass if I don't get the riding mower working. So, and then, of course, we're talking about Yinzers and Jagoffs today. And, of course, I may have mentioned on this show once or twice about, I think it's I don't know if it's like the newspaper guy, his kid, some substitute. But, man, I tell you what, I play hide and seek trying to find the newspaper every single day. Is it on my porch? Is it underneath porch furniture? Is it in the bushes? Is it on the sidewalk? I don't know. I don't know where it is. And most people are probably like, you still get the newspaper? What's that? That's probably like the other Zach or Nate or some of the younger guys that are part of Steel City Underground. So I know you're having a little bit of issues too yourself, Zach, without naming any names. I think the reason we are doing this show today isn't necessarily to say, hey, this is reasons the Steelers will beat the Giants or they'll lose the Giants, because who cares about preseason wins and losses? I think we just want to head off on the path some of the expectations heading into Friday's preseason game.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they look at the preseason, they think the preseason matters when it comes to what their records are. I know you see a lot of bottom feeder teams in the NFL, they'll go 4-0 in the preseason, and you'll have elite teams, like the Steelers, Patriots, whomever, that they're dropping losses all over the place, so I don't really look at the wins and loss record stat keeping as anything. I think really this is a time to see what the young players have. A lot of times the veteran privilege comes into play, and you see older guys who've been around the league before, and they know what they're doing. They prove themselves. There's no reason risking injury. So they sit out, and you have these young guys come in and prove their worth, whether they're battling for a roster spot or they've been around for a year or two, and they're just trying to prove that they've made progress. I think that's what the fans need to realize the preseason is truly about. I think that's really what, with the Steelers having all these depth battles going on, that's what we need to be paying attention to, especially this preseason week one matchup against the Giants.
You say the young guys proving their worth. There are some that are going to prove they're not worthy as part of that as well. And I guess, everything's sunshine and rainbows. That was part of the thing. That was the thing I was talking about. And without getting into what we want to say. We're going to protect the guilty instead of protect the innocent. Some of the people who, and I don't think it's any of the listeners here anyways, because I think there's just some people who love being miserable on the internet. They're going to, whine and complain about this game. They're already whining. They're still whining and complaining. They're complaining about Mike Tomlin getting a contract extension. They complain about this, complain about that. Trust me, if the Pittsburgh Steelers make you that miserable, I don't know what else can make you happy in life. At least we've been fortunate enough to follow a team that has it together and have had it together for a very long period of time. I mean, I'm 35 years old, so I was born in 81. I was too young to remember that dark period. I wasn't born yet to experience the 70s Super Bowl team, so most of that comes through osmosis of highlights and replays and NFL Network and things of that nature. But I got to experience, I was really hitting my stride 10, 11 years old, getting into football. Bill Cowher takes over for Chuck Noll, and I don't know what it's really like to experience a losing football team. I could not imagine being a fan of, now the Raiders had a very long period of just mediocrity where they probably have a very similar type of club that was, they were good back in the 70s and even maybe portions of the 80s, and then they had that little run with Rich Gannon and John Gruden had left, and then his replacement Bill Callahan came in, and they made it to the Super Bowl, and then nothing up until last year. So they have a very rabid fan base. Even the Cowboys fans, for that matter, they were terrible for a while here, and now all of a sudden they've kind of turned it around. So I guess what we're trying to say is, if football makes you that miserable, just change the channel. Don't watch. I mean, you have much bigger things to complain about, particularly preseason football, because we just got a depth chart that came out, and a lot of this is so inconsequential. In fact, there are so many. I'm going to start here, Zach, just to knock these out. As soon as I get this up, this goes on scrolling forever until I bring it up. Unlike last year, there's a number of people who did not participate in practice and are not listed on this depth chart, which is quite odd in and of itself. It didn't necessarily mean, even Mike Tomlin had mentioned in his press conference after training camp, that not participating doesn't necessarily mean they're ruled out for Friday, but it doesn't look good. At least Landry Jones will probably be sitting. We know Ben Roethlisberger is going to sit. Some of the veteran privilege, like you said, Antonio Brown will be sitting. Marquise Pouncey will be sitting. And then there's a few others here. Martavis Bryant hasn't been reinstated. Sammy Coates is still on the PUP list. DeMarcus Ayers got banged up. Bell hasn't signed his tag. James Conner, I don't know. I guess he's back in pads as of the last, so we might actually see him, but he was not listed on the depth chart. And let me see who else here. Cam Sutton's been hurt. Mike Mitchell's been banged up. Senquez Golson, the usual. And Keon Adams also dealing, I guess, maybe with an injury and also some personal issues. So those are all of the players that... I don't want to say they're out, but more than likely, don't be surprised. That's like 10 names right there that won't play on Friday.
That's the thing. You look at a lot of those names, too. None of them are necessarily, not none of them, but a lot of them aren't even fighting for a roster spot. A lot of those guys have proven themselves. They're going to have a spot when they come back and are healthy. I think you look at some of those guys like Sammy Coates, Senquez Golson, Keon Adams, players like that. They are missing out on very valuable opportunities. DeMarcus Ayers, all those guys. You had the chance to come in preseason football, get reps as a starter or as a second-team player that you might otherwise not have the opportunity to get during the season, and you're missing those opportunities. That's really setting you back. I know I was talking to somebody on Twitter yesterday or 2 days ago about Keon Adams. The guy's a 7th-round draft pick, really underrated in my eyes, but if you're not on the field to play, you're not going to get the reps. You're not going to get the ability to show why you were worth that draft pick, and a lot of times that could kill these players in the long run. So seeing that, I think, is something to look out for. But guys like Sammy Coates, too, which, you could really make the argument that he's on the roster bubble, whether fans like to admit that or not. His inability to be in there consistently, get these reps, especially with Bryant not being reinstated yet, or fully reinstated, I should say. He's missing out on a great opportunity to try to build some chemistry with Ben, build some chemistry with Josh Dobbs or whomever. And he's missing out on that. So that's all detrimental to them in the long run.
Yeah, we're gonna go through some names and just yay or nay this, but just real quick too, the Giants are going to be sitting players much the same way. I don't expect to see Eli Manning, Odell Beckham Jr. Will he even be on the sideline? Probably. He's with the team. I mean, Brandon Marshall, guys of that nature, or a few on the defense as well. Maybe they play a series or two, and that's about it. And we're going to see. Oh man, it's very hard. Most people know I'm upbeat, I'm positive, I'm always the glass is half full, but it's really hard to not use the word camp bodies. I find it very derogative to say that, but there are a lot of guys that are going to be playing in this game that will not be playing football in about a month or so. We trim this roster from 90 down to 53. You get like 10 guys on the practice squad. That's about it. And I mean, the 10 guys on the practice squad, maybe the bottom 5 to 10 on the 53. It's just a revolving door week to week of if you're still in the NFL or not. Not everyone has the luxury of being Ben Roethlisberger, for example, and knowing that you can just quit when you want to, basically. He's always teasing us with retirement. So we are going to see maybe what life could be like without Ben as we push forward to Josh Dobbs being named the starter. And I want to see Josh succeed, but I don't have a very high expectation of this. I've covered it many times on previous episodes. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him play much the same way that people gripe about Landry Jones and how he played in the past, maybe hold on to the ball too long, not make reads. He may have to scramble and be mobile with his legs because that's his fallback as his talent. Timing off, receivers running the wrong routes, tipped passes getting intercepted. He could be very good, or it could look very bad. I don't know how you gauge that. I've said a lot about it, Zach. Maybe you'll get your opinion as opposed to mine, and then, of course, Brian, who isn't very high on him at all.
Yeah, I think if you look at a guy like Dobbs, fans need to realize he's not going to be the second coming right out the gate, especially as a somewhat underrated prospect coming out of Tennessee. I think his biggest issue with a lot of his overall ability was his footwork. He had very, I don't want to say pathetic, but pathetic footwork coming out. And a lot of that, especially with the short and intermediate throws, you saw a lot of just errant passes that you think a quarterback, especially an NFL caliber quarterback, should be able to make in their sleep for the most part. But I think if you look at him, even though guys like Brown are going to be sitting out, having the chance to throw to players that are like DHB, who's been around for a little bit, or even someone like Eli Rogers, that's proven that he can be a reliable receiver in the league after last season. I think that gives him the opportunity to come in, get his feet wet and see what's going on there. I will say I'm a little bit higher on Dobbs coming out than I was with Landry Jones in 2013. I'm an anti-Big 12 quarterback type of guy. Is my preference. I've never sold on them, and that's why I wasn't really that sold on Jones. I think Jones is a quality backup. I think he's nothing more than that. I think he's average at best. I think Dobbs, I think his floor at this point is average backup like a Landry Jones, but I think he does have the upside based on his ability to, and he does have a nice arm. I've seen some passes so far at this camp where he was able to zip the ball down the field with great velocity and place it right where it needs to be. And with the Steelers offense, the deep ball is a very crucial part of everything. But what concerns me at this point, like I said, was those short and intermediate throws that until he gets his footwork up and running, if he's not on the same page with his receivers, whoever that may be at that point, whether it's a guy that's been around or if it's like a Marcus Tucker or a Kobe Hamilton type receiver, you might see some kind of bad throws and fans might think that's instantly him not having his place here, because I can think back to 2013 and 14 in Jones's first years, and it was painful to watch. It was painful to watch him try and make some of those throws, and you might see that from Dobbs. I'm hoping you don't, because I do have confidence in him, but time will tell.
And Landry was getting tattooed, and let me tell you, I have a Landry Jones jersey because people have teased me about how much I've defended him. I've defended him over the last 2 years of his career, his first 2 years of the career. I was right in line with you, waiting for the torch to be lit. The pitchforks were sharpened. I thought he was terrible. He looked like a deer in headlights. So unfortunately, I usually go to these preseason games. If I make it through the whole thing depends on if I'm drinking or not sometimes. And it also depends on what week of the preseason that we're in. Very painful when you get to like week 1. If you get like week 3 and you get like maybe a quarter's worth of the Killer Bees, it's a little more enjoyable, especially the way they lit it up in New Orleans last year. I wasn't there, obviously, but just being able to watch that, it was more than tolerable. It was enjoyable. In fact, I got ribbed a little bit about making fun of the Hall of Fame game, but that was actually a little bit better quality football. They seemed to be more prepared than you normally expect for that type of game. But yeah, Dobbs, I could see it go either way. Yes, he does have a very strong arm with him, but that still doesn't mean much for a guy that's had stone hands at times throughout his career like Darius Hayward-Bay. Justin Hunter, who seems to have like a catch radius like crazy, we're going to see where he fits in. Currently on the depth chart, he's behind DHB. So what we're looking at here, they listed Antonio Brown as a starter or wide receiver. Dobbs is not going to have him at his disposal. And of course, we've already said Big Ben is out and Dobbs will be in there. You mentioned Kobe Hamilton. He's way back here. There's Juju is behind Justin Hunter, so we may see Dobbs and Juju or Bart Houston and Juju. And then Kobe is going to have to make Bart Houston look good like he did Braden Renner on like one of the only catches. I forget what game it was, but he like laid out. There's going to be someone inevitably somewhere that's going to say, oh, that Bart Houston, I hope he takes Landry Jones's job. And it's just like, get out of here, you know. But it's a learning curve, and I wouldn't be surprised to see as much with Dobbs. Dobbs has been mobile. He's been getting better, and that's because the difference between Dobbs right now and Landry then, Landry was still behind. Well, we had Bruce Gradkowski here, and Landry was essentially like the third team kind of guy. He was getting some like barely any reps whatsoever. And actually, Houston may end up. No, I can't say it. Never mind. I was going to say he was going to be better than Renner, but that's probably going to be a mess from all reports and even my own eyewitness account. It looked like a mess, and that's just kind of how it goes when you don't have guys who have the rhythm together. So there's going to be a few of the first team guys out there with Dobbs. One guy that's going to be out more than likely entered the concussion protocol from Sunday's practice, Alejandro Villanueva. I see absolutely no reason to have him on the field Friday. There's absolutely no point whatsoever. Just let him rest. I think you can agree with that. So that means another guy who could really ascend and make the most of this opportunity is Gerald Hawkins. And what do you think maybe about Gerald Hawkins? He got to play like 40-some snaps last year and then just ended up on injured reserve. Does he have to have a really big showing? Is this his opportunity Friday?
I was a very big Hawkins fan coming out of LSU last year in the draft. I was elated when the Steelers drafted him because I think he's about as prototypical of a left tackle as you think of in the NFL as you can get today. He needed to add some weight. It looks like from what I can tell in person, he seems to have broadened out a little bit from where he was last season, which I think will only help him. But I think he has the athletic ability, as being a starter as long as he was in the SEC. That's no joke, and I don't care how good or bad you are. That you're going up against some of the best defensive linemen week in and week out on your own team and against other teams, and he held his own consistently there. And I think last year, for those very small numbers of snaps you saw, he did well for the most part. I know the team was really high on him last year, and they seem to be just as high on him this year. I think really, there is no question at this point whether or not he's going to jump Villanueva because it's not going to happen. I thought maybe potentially before he signed his tender that Hawkins might have had a chance of coming in there and taking advantage of that. But the minute he signed his contract extension, there was no doubt in my mind. I think at this point, you see a guy like Hawkins, this is really his chance to kind of prove his worth over a guy like Chris Hubbard, which, Hubbard's been their swing guy, sixth lineman now for what seems forever. You can't go to a Steelers game without hearing them say 74 is an eligible receiver or whatever.
Yeah, that's what it is. He's kind of like the jumbo tight end.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if they have Hawkins in mind as that in that type of sense, or if Hawkins will then become more of their swing backup tackle to give Villanueva and Gilbert an opportunity to rest. But I think he has the traits that you look for in a benchmark offensive lineman, especially at left tackle. And if he can get that going, work on his pad level, which I know is a knock on him coming out of LSU, and kind of gets a little stronger at the point of attack, I think he can be a very valuable asset to them moving forward. And when you think about it, a guy like Gilbert, Gilbert's now 30. He's on his back end of his contract. I think he's signed now through 2018, so it gives him 2 more seasons. And he's still performing at a high level, but, strange things happen, especially at that point, him being 32. You don't know what direction the Steelers might want to go at that point. So that could be Hawkins' breeding ground to get to the point where he can step in and be their guy there. I know that's kind of thinking out in the future, but that's something that's crossed my mind watching Hawkins, thinking of how he can potentially find his way in the lineup at some point.
I don't know that he's necessarily in danger whatsoever. Chris Hubbard's still around for one more season, I believe, through 2017, and then could be a free agent here soon. The thing I didn't think of, interesting observation that you made there was, could maybe Hawkins be that swing guy? Like, I think Hubbard was a pleasant surprise last year. He, by all means, he wasn't anticipating playing tackle whatsoever, and ended up being pretty darn good in relief for Marcus Gilbert. But Villanueva got the same type of start, the big jumbo kind of package guy. I remember, in fact, the very first game that year when they played up in New England, he was in, and you almost kind of thought, since he was a former tight end in college, that maybe they might throw the ball his way also. In fact, that's a very miserable Landry Jones story, to be honest, is when they were with the Seahawks and everybody and their brother knew that where that ball was going. So not to mention that you're I don't know, just putting Landry back there. Did you really think they weren't paying attention? But those are old sour grapes. I feel bad because it's like he gets put in a bad situation like that, and then everybody just, rips on the guy. But as far as the linemen go, the only guy they really brought in through the traditional draft free agency, college free agency type deal was Ethan Cooper, and he's a small school guy. It's going to be a project, maybe a practice squad type developmental player. BJ Finney's going to be playing in Marquise Pouncey's spot. I think he's a lock on the roster, regardless as the backup center, backup guard. So you're really looking at, can Hawkins be this swing tackle, and then you've got the utility guy like Chris Hubbard, Kyle Friend, Matt Filer, Jake Rogers. I'm looking at some of these other names. Brian Mahalik was on the practice squad last year at some point too. He may even made the active roster as just the backup too. I don't know that he got a helmet, but those are the guys that are going to be in there at some point, and hopefully they don't get Dobbs or Bart Houston killed because they're going to be all out of sync. I don't think we'll see a whole lot of Ramon Foster, Dave DeCastro, Marcus Gilbert. They will probably be out there for a series or two and just to work with the young passer. Now we jump over to the tight ends, and this can go anyway. Actually, you know what? We were talking wide receivers just a little bit. How much do you think Eli Rogers plays on Friday?
I mean, I think he has a lot to prove still at this point. I'm going to say that hesitantly because I know Steelers fans will start jumping down my throat with that. But the guy, we have to remember, was an undrafted free agent, missed a year due to injury, worked his butt off to get to where he is now. He was a surprise to many last year. I think he proved himself to an extent. But, with Brown sitting and with the fact that people need to realize that there still is an open battle beyond Brown everywhere. And I think Rodgers needs to get those reps and prove that, the selection of Juju Smith-Schuster is not anything he should be afraid of. The signing of Justin Hunter is nothing he should be afraid of, to prove that he can still be a valuable asset to this offense. And I think getting him as many reps as you can right away out the gate, especially the guy like Dobbs under center, that's only going to be good for him in the long run. He's still developing that chemistry with Ben. I think he said in an interview recently about how long it's taken him to get on the same page with him. I think he needs the reps. I think he needs to go out there and show that he still deserves a spot because I think he has a lot to make the roster. I know some people have talked about potentially letting him go depending on how the battle pans out. I think that's absolutely asinine. I think he's a lock for this roster. I think to show that he can get on there every Sunday, be a guy that helps out the offense as a number 3, potentially number 2, depending on what happens with Brian. I think it's valuable for him to get those reps now.
And with the wide receivers, I mean, you've got Bryant still isn't reinstated, like I said. Coates on the pup, and then DeMarcus Ayers banged up too. Antonio Brown sitting out. This is now or never. Maybe not as much for Eli Rogers, but definitely Kobe Hamilton, DHB, could be in jeopardy of losing his roster spot. Justin Hunter being added. And then, of course, Juju Smith-Schuster, who was banged up and then apparently got a personal coaching session with Hines Ward throughout the last week or so. That's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. The tight ends, I was going to mention the tight ends, but I think we could just gloss over this because, I mean, these guys are like interchangeable. We know who Jesse James is. I don't know if he gets a whole lot of time or not, just being a third-year player. He doesn't really have that veteran privilege. David Johnson does, though, but you may need him out there just to kind of help and get some things in order as that veteran. Xavier Grimble, I think he's got a lot to show. It's going to be down to Faison Odom, who's the 6'8", 251 rookie out of Fordham, who we got to speak to about maybe 2 months ago here on the show. And then newly acquired Jake McGee, who replaces one of the guys that we liked, who was Scott Orndorff. So I don't know that McGee has been around enough to will they even put him on the field? I kind of doubt it. I don't know. And then, of course, Rosie Nix is the fullback, but we already knew that. Your other wide receivers, of course, Marcus Tucker, we mentioned Kenan Severin. I don't know. There's a whole lot for those guys too. So we could get into the fourth quarter and things. We're really not seeing a whole lot of much of anything if these guys can stick to the 53. And I think there's really a bottleneck there with the receivers. But I'd like to jump over to the defense because here's the depth chart. There's no surprises here. It's Cam Hayward on one side is a defensive end. You've got Stephon Tuitt as the other bookend, Javon Hargrave, who became the first rookie starter on the defensive line there in 20 years. But Dupree is banged up. Ryan Shazier is banged up. They're listed as starters as well. Vince Williams, James Harrison. James Harrison's not going to play in this game either, so we're probably expecting to see TJ Watt. Artie Burns has been banged up, and then they listed Robert Golden here because Mike Mitchell has been out, so Golden inserted into this starting lineup. Sean Davis, could he see reps as a second-year player? Maybe. And Ross Cockrell. I don't know how you feel about this. This is going to be a little mix and match as we go down through the depth chart, but I think last season, if anything, it looked like Mike Tomlin and company were content on leaving their starting defense out there as opposed to the offense. Most of those guys played a full half.
I think that was reasonable on their part because of the fact you're trying to build that consistency for the defense, especially a defense that's taken so much criticism over recent years. And to an extent, I don't know if it'll be as extreme as it was last year where they were playing an entire half of football. But realistically, I think if you look at it, they're still a young defense. You know, depending on if Artie Burns is there or not, depending on his health, I personally wouldn't risk it. I think there's plenty of time for him to get the reps he needs in the preseason as a tune-up. But guys like Javon Hargrave, Sean Davis, you know, they're still young. TJ Watt's figured to get a lot of reps this year as the year goes along, especially depending on how they decide to manage Harrison's snaps moving forward. I don't know if they'll keep the D lineman on there nearly as much, considering the fact that Hayward and Tuitt, I think, have done their part. You know, Tuitt being a veteran to an extent at this point in time, has been around long enough. He started enough games. You know, he knows what he's doing. And having them both still coming off of injuries this past offseason, I don't think it's necessarily as worthwhile having them out there, especially when LT Walton's a guy that you're trying to get more steps to see how he can do. Guys like that, you know, I think you're going to see some of the starters out there for a decent amount of time, but I don't think it's going to be for as long as it was last season. I think a lot of that just comes with them being predominantly the same unit that we had last year in 2016. They have that consistency, and they've been relatively healthy this offseason as well as you can be at this point of the year. So I think it's reasonable to say that you're going to see him for at least a quarter, maybe close to a half, but I'd be surprised either way.
Yeah, the defensive line looks pretty stacked. LT Walton got some starts last year. Dan McCullers needs a very good showing in this preseason to maybe make this roster because it looks like they've been using LT, and even Tyson Alualu can fit in there. Both of these guys they're ginormous guys. I mean, now Dan the Shade Tree is 6'7", 352. We're talking LT 6'5", 305, and Alualu 6'3", 304, and a former, I think, 10th overall first-round draft pick, 2010 maybe, with Jacksonville. So definitely uphill battle for those guys, and then everybody behind them: Johnny Maxey, Roy Fallon, Christian Brown, Francis Callan, Levon Hooks. I think we know where they all stand already. I think the linebackers was probably the most interesting thing because with Bud Dupree, it's probably going to be Anthony Chickalo starting there. He's listed first on the depth chart ahead of Arthur Moats. Ryan Shazier, should he not be out, listed first behind him is LJ Fort, and then even Steven Johnson, and then you go over to Tyler Matakevich. And it's interesting because Matakevich is making plays in camp, and he's been running, basically calling the plays for the second team defense. So I found that interesting to see Fort in that position, and even flipping around to Vince Williams, it's Steven Johnson, then Matakevich, and then Fort. So I wonder who actually starts on Friday, even given this depth chart, because it looked like the inroads was for Dirty Red to be out there. And I'd be excited to see what he does, because he's a 7th-round draft pick, and he seems like he's just a guy that knows how to play football, be in the right spot at the right time, versus, you talk about TJ Watt, who will more than likely start on the opposite side of Chicolo. And Watt is like just like his brothers, freak of nature, just an athletic, genetic freak. And then you have Tyler Matakevich, it's like the lunch pail guy, just coming to do his job. What did you pull from all of this depth chart stuff with the linebackers?
Yeah, I was surprised. You hear all the reports of Matakevich running with the twos, and I think that he's earned that spot thus far. especially last year. With his development as a special teamer, and he got some reps here and there on defense. I thought he proved his worth as a leader, as a guy who just gets the game of football, one of those rare heads you see. And I think the depth chart might be a little misleading. I'd be surprised, honestly, if you come out against the Giants and you see Ford and Johnson both being with the twos or the starting line, depending on how things pan out. I think Matakevich is truly their number 2 guy, especially with him calling the shots and whatnot. But, strange things happen. They might just be giving Ford and Johnson the look there, potentially, because they, in my opinion, are the 2 that are really battling for those last spots, with the inside linebackers, being that, Matakevich, I think at this point, has pretty much locked his spot up. I think, depending on if they keep 4 or 5 guys, it's going to come down to Ford or Johnson for that last spot. If they keep, this might be their way of just trying to give them some misdirection and give them an opportunity to prove themselves. But at the same time, I think Fort is reps. I mean, that might be a little unpopular opinion, but he's an athletic guy. He's not Ryan Shazier athletic, but he's far more athletic on the field than Vince Williams and Matakevich, just with his ability to drop back into coverage, to kind of come up and stuff the run. He's not as great at the point of attack. But a guy like Metkler, like you said, he's a lunch pail guy, comes in, gets the game of football, works hard every play. And that was the thing when you're watching him at Temple. He was always the guy that you saw firing to the ball. He could be at the opposite side of the field, and he was going to be determined to get to the ball whenever the play was done. And that's the type of demeanor I think that makes him a leader on this defense, up and coming. And I think he'll get more reps than what the depth chart might indicate. I think it's hard to judge a lot of these depth charts, especially before the first game of the preseason, before any of the dust really begins to settle on some of these battles. So I don't really know what to make of it. I think realistically, Matakevich is there. He's going to make some noise. He's going to push himself up. But I think when it's all said and done, he'll be the third man, so to speak, when it comes to the inside linebacker rotation.
And not only that, Matakevich making plays, picked off Josh Dobbs on yesterday or Thursday's practice. So, I mean, he's out there just getting it done. So, I mean, it's amazing that the Steelers are able to find some of the guys they do that have the talent they do. But you make a very fair point, and that's the same observation that I had, that LJ Fort may be a little more athletic for the plays presented to him. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on all of these guys, particularly the linebackers. Now, the corners, it's not as exciting because we're not going to get to see Senquez Golson. We're not going to get to see Cam Sutton. Artie Burns, more than likely. I don't know what's going to go on with him. I doubt William Gay plays much, if at all. It's going to be the guy. We've already talked enough about Mike Hilton from the last time I had you with me, so we're not going to beat that drum anymore. I mean, are we really looking forward to seeing like Brandon Dixon or maybe Tarish Webb or, I think I want to see Brian Allen, but I think the most surprising thing is that Cody Sensabaugh is so far down on this. He's like the third string on here. And when Mike Tomlin was asked, have you seen anything that's impressed you about Cody Sensabaugh, I almost forgot that he was signed by this team. You don't see him much in the drills. And Mike Tomlin's response was not so far or not yet or something like that, basically alluding to he hasn't made any impact for being a veteran guy. So I think, if anything, the last names on here, Mike Hilton, Cody Sensabaugh, come on down. You're the next contestant. This is their time.
Yeah, I think, Sensabaugh came in with tampered fanfare, if you want to call it that, because of his up and down career thus far. I like the signing whenever they've gone back in the offseason. I thought he was a quality guy, had the ability to play inside and out, but like you said, his lack of headlines, which could be good or bad depending on your look at it, is kind of, interesting, because you look at it, you thought he was going to come in here, have a big guy that could prove or provide some veteran depth for guys like Artie Burns and Ross Cockrell, and to an extent even William Gay, who's the veterans of all veterans in that group. But seeing a guy like him, maybe he'll do well, and maybe he just hasn't had the opportunity to really show his stuff. He has the versatility, like I mentioned. He can play inside or out. Seeing him third on here, whether that's truly third again or that's just another misdirection thing with the depth chart, I think he has the shot to come in there and do something. But I don't know. Seeing all these young no-name guys on here, I hate to say no name because they're relevant at this point of the year, but if any of them make the roster, even the practice squad, I'd be surprised. So it'll be interesting to see who gets the reps, especially right out of the gate. Like you said, with Gabe probably not getting a whole lot of reps, being a 32-year-old veteran, and with Burns being so banged up to an extent so far this year, or this training camp, you could see guys like Hilton, Brian Allen, and Sensabaugh come in and potentially show themselves. I know Dixon's been getting some attention recently with some of his ability, especially high-putting balls. So we'll see what happens. But Sensabaugh is a guy I'm going to be paying attention to moving forward, just to see if he is truly a good veteran signing, or if he's just going to be one of these guys that comes in there, stays for a year, and gets out.
And the one that two things we skipped over and just we're wrapping here. So we didn't want to, again, beat the drum on another favorite, Fitzgerald Toussaint, who's looked fantastic throughout camp. We're going to see how he and Niall Davis compete, but more than likely, and I get the guys' names confused. We got two guys that have T's and W's in their names. I think it's Terrell. It's Trey Williams and Terrell Watson, I believe, are the other guys, and Brandon Brown, Dukes, or Bill Bev DeBow, or whatever the band was that Mike Tomlin calls him. I think they're going to be seeing a lot of action. I don't know. I think they'll be careful with James Conner. I briefly glossed over that. But, folks, what we should be looking at as opposed to wins and losses, let's see how the offense does on one series, how the defense does on one series. Make note of who's out there, who's making plays, who's screwing up, who might get yanked and substituted if they do screw up. Those are the things to really pay attention to in the preseason games. And now then, since they don't cut from 90 to 75, these guys may get an extended look through even the third and fourth game this year. And hey, who knows? We may actually get Martavis Bryant back within the next few days. Ian Rappaport is reporting that. We'll see. Mike Tomlin says he doesn't know. We don't know. I think there's there's some public pressure maybe to hold the NFL's feet to the fire to get this guy reinstated all the way, and not just conditionally reinstated so where he can't practice or play in preseason games. So that's what we're talking about, folks. So, don't break your television set over the preseason. So, Zach Metkler, my guest host, thank you for coming back on the show, taking some time out of your day.
Thanks for having me again, Joe. I look forward to seeing how the Giants game pans out, even though it is the preseason.
Yeah, I think we all are, and that's from MetLife Stadium. And, of course, I think that'll provoke some more questions, so don't forget about the email and the fan line. You can find both of those over at steelcityunderground.com. Until next time, be safe, be good, and we will catch you after the first preseason game. Oh, that's a pretty good programming note. Most of you probably don't listen beyond this point. If you're still with me, we're all over the place. So don't just look for us on Mondays and Fridays now, because these games are everywhere. We may have a few bonus episodes in between too. So with that said, Steelers Nation, we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.